All right. Good morning, everybody. Members of the committee, good morning. Members of the public, good morning. And those joining us online, welcome to House Labor and Health and Social Services Committee. I'm going to call the meeting to order, and Mr. Caldwell, if you would call the roll.
Representative Clouston.
Aye.
Representative Guggenmoss.
Here.
Representative Heft.
Here.
Representative McCann.
Aye. Here, sorry.
Representative Ottman.
Here.
Representative Stivar. Representative Wasserberger.
Here.
Representative Yen.
Here.
Chairman Rodriguez Williams. Here. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. So members of the committee, members of the public, I'm going to briefly go over our committee rules. There is a handout up front of the committee room if you're interested in obtaining one yourself. We ask that everybody keep their cell phones on silent. Although it may seem an awkward formality, speakers will address their comments and questions to the chairman, not to individual committee members or to others in attendance. This helps us avoid personalities and comments of a personal nature. Comments will be directed to the issue under discussion by the committee. Distracting comments on unrelated side issues are out of order. Speakers, please avoid personal criticism, ridicule, or name-calling directed at anyone else in attendance at this meeting. This includes comments of a personal nature directed at other speakers, audience members, or members of our committee. For audience members, we expect you will refrain from any behavior that disrupts the orderly conduct of our meeting. Specifically, our rules prohibit speaking out loud when another person is talking, carrying on loud and distracting side conversations, any shouting, clapping, or booing in response to speakers' comments. Our general guideline is simple. We just ask that everyone conducts themselves in a civil and respectful manner at all times during the meeting. This morning, we have two bills on the agenda. We have Senate File 103 and Senate File 125. We'll take up Senate File 103 first. This bill is titled Terminating and Defunding Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. It's sponsored by Senator Steinmetz. I'll move this bill on the table for consideration. Good morning and welcome, Senator Steinmetz.
Good morning, Madam Chairman and Committee. My name is Senator Sherry Steinmetz. I represent Senate District 3, which is Goshen, Weston, and Niobrara counties. And today I bring you a bill on diversity, terminating and defunding diversity, equity, and inclusion. And Madam Chairman, if you recall, this bill is a result of ongoing work that we've been doing over the last several years. When I was on the Appropriations Committee, I guess it's 4 or 5 years ago now, we were meeting with the Board of Trustees and we started discovering a root of this issue in all their programming and in some of their coursework. And then we noticed that some of the coursework was being required through general studies. And so we began the process of budget amendments to try to start rooting it out of the institution. As you recall, last session, we had a budget amendment that prohibited all of this. However, it was partially vetoed by the governor. And so thus the genesis of this bill, it's been a long time in coming, and that's the reason. And obviously right now with the presidency of President Trump, it is a great time to be working on this as a state as well, because through his executive orders, he is also working on that at all levels of the federal government. And I don't know that I've seen anything come out as far as our educational institutions, but we can take care of that at the state level. So, Madam Chairman, if you would look at the materials I provided you, there's a document from the University of Wyoming on master's in education curriculum. And if you see, there is a highlighted section there, and these are required courses for a master's degree, Master of Arts degree at the University of Wyoming. They're mandating 3 credit hours in issues in multicultural education. If you turn to the next page, you'll see another what the course actually is there, the EDST 3480. And then when you go into the multicultural education, it talks about what this actually is, examine the meaning, including causes and effects of racism, sexism, and other forms of bias, explore one's own personal response to these biases. And then number 7, discuss school level strategies targeted toward more just and equitable education. And then if you go to the next page, you'll see some quotes from voices from the red states challenging radical positioning in some of the most conservative communities in America. And this is from one of the document from one of the teachers. And so they're talking about using positioning theory and critical race theory. We examine desperate power relationships between white governance and faculty of color. And it goes on and on. I won't read it all to you, but this is some of the information. And then the final exam is on the last page, and it talks about using 2 examples. Please show how the experience you have selected above will help you promote social justice in your classroom and community. And so this is required in our educational coursework there at the University of Wyoming. So with that, Madam Chairman, I will just take you briefly through the bill, page by page, and we'll look at part of the solution to this. And so this is an act to the administration of government generally prohibiting diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts and mandates by state agencies and educational institutions. And if you go on to page 2, that's where we just start with the definition. Diversity, equity, and inclusion includes any of the following: influencing hiring or employment practices with respect to race, sex, color, or ethnicity, other than through the use of race and gender neutral practices in accordance with any applicable state and federal law. And you will see that all through the bill, that if there is applicable state and federal law that must be followed for accreditation or some funding mechanism, that is anticipated in this bill and exempted out. B is promoting differential treatment or providing special benefits to persons on the basis of race, color, or ethnicity. Promoting policies or procedures designed or implemented in reference to race, color, or ethnicity, except for policies or procedures necessary to comply with any state or federal law. So there's your exemption again. And then conducting trainings, programs, or activities designed or implemented in reference to race, color, ethnicity, or gender dysphoria, except for trainings, programs, or activities that are for the sole purpose of ensuring compliance with state law, federal law, or any applicable court order. So there you go again. The next section is just your definitions, what an entity is. That basically covers pretty much everything. We did add in Romanet III, federally recognized Indian tribes. We want to make sure that they are excluded from this bill completely so that none of their cultural heritage or any of that is affected in any way. And so that was something that the tribes brought to us as we considered this on the other side. Also in subsection B, this is kind of some of the meat of the bill, and that is as a condition of receiving or expending any monies or funds appropriated each, and then there will be an amendment to insert governmental if you so choose to take it up. Each governmental entity shall not expend any appropriated funds or funds received from bequests, charges, deposits, donations, endowments, fees, grants, gifts, tuition, which applies to the university, and any other source for programs or activities unless federal or state law otherwise requires. So we're saying you can't establish or maintain the Office of Diversity of Inclusion in Romanet I. We're saying that it can't affect your hiring in Romanet II. We're saying in Romanet III that you can't compel, require, or induce or solicit any person to abide by DEI or a DEI statement. In 4, give preference to them in any way on these bases, or require this as a condition of employment. So those are the 5 things. And then you in section C on page 5, that is your exemptions. So nothing in this section shall be construed to prohibit the use or consideration of bona fide qualifications based on sex that are reasonably necessary to the normal operation of public higher education. There's nothing to prohibit the University of Wyoming or Wyoming Community Colleges or an employee from submitting documentation or a statement of purpose for a grant or to comply with accreditation. Accreditation is very important. We don't want to affect that. Also, another exemption to prohibit provision of support services, training, all of that for the tribes. We don't want to hurt that in any way. And then for purpose of this section, DEI or the office or program shall not include, and this is further academic course instruction, the completion or dissemination of scholarly research or creative works by students or faculty of the colleges or the university, an activity of a student organization, so we don't want to touch that if they're, if it's on their own time and their own guest speakers who come, we don't want to intrude on that, or the data collection for the colleges or the university. So those are the exemptions. And then the following shall apply to this section, and that's the Indian tribes and their citizens. Their members are not a race or radical classification for the purposes of this bill, and a political class, classification, identity, or federally recognized Indian tribes or programs. So just another exemption to make sure we're exempting out the Indian tribes. And then we go into the related initiatives and funding. There's a definition of constraint there for you. Related content, and there was a proposed amendment in your packet. After related content, it means advocating for the concepts prohibited in WS 921014.4, and that's just kind of bringing that back into the whole act. And then we're defining what a related course is and what a related practice is. And when you go into the related practice, that is obviously very important. It includes any requirement or guidance that a course instructor we might need to say includes, or curate materials on the basis of race, sex, or gender dysphoria. It includes participating in any workshop, training, seminar, or professional development on any related content. It does not include any program explicitly required by and limited to the institutional obligations, there you go again, to comply with state or federal law or an applicable court order. There's your exemption again. The big thing about all of this is that it, in subsection B, does not require or constrain students to expend tuition or other funds on or enroll in a related course in order to satisfy any of the academic degree program requirements, including general education, major, minor, or certificate requirements subject to subsection D of the section. And so that's very important because people are being compelled to take these courses for their degree programs. So we want to make sure that that's no longer the case. Then we deal in subsection 3 with the Board of Trustees and the community colleges, and they shall not require, solicit, or incentivize faculty or students to apply for or participate in related practices or include related content in any required course as a condition of approval, designation, or listing as part of any academic degree or program. So that's just guidance to them. And then more about the academic degree programs. And so basically that is the bill, and I would stand for any questions on the bill that you might have.
Thank you, Senator Steinmetz.
You're welcome.
Committee, do you have any questions for the bill sponsor? The content of the bill. Representative Yen.
Madam Chairman, as usual, I have lots of questions. Madam Chairman, Senator Steinmetz, okay. So you gave us this example of a course with the highlighted course objectives, issues in multicultural education. So is it your intent that with passage of the bill, this course would no longer be required or even taught in the school?
Senator Steinmetz.
Madam Chairman, Representative Yen, thank you for that question. It is my intent that that cannot be a mandatory course. If someone wants to take it of their own volition, then that would be fine. But it is my intention that it not be mandatory.
Follow up? Representative Yen.
Sure, Madam Chairman. So you're saying that examining the meaning or including causes of effect of racism, sexism, and other forms of bias should not be taught in school?
Senator Steinmetz.
Madam Chairman, Ms. Representative Yen, it's a policy decision for the body, whether this be mandated as a requirement or whether someone use it to their own benefit on something they want to pursue. Madam Chairman, Representative Yin, I believe that our state and our citizens are wanting to see more of a colorblind law and more a merit-based system rather than basing these on these unchangeable things about people that actually cause more division and less unity. And so that is our attempt at solving this problem.
Madam Chairman.
Follow up, Representative Yen.
Yeah, one more question. Thank you. I think that really helps me understand the intent of the bill. The other question I have is what is your stance on the proposed amendment? Because, I mean, I'm surprised this bill made it out of your chamber as it is right now, because without that amendment, I mean, I think it's essentially a First Amendment violation. We're compelling the speech of private institutions in the main part of the bill, which is what, page 3, 20 to 23, where each entity can't even spend donated funds. So if a private corporation took money from the state, we said that even other monies, they couldn't spend it on whatever they wanted to spend it on. So I'm curious on what your stance on the proposed amendment that you gave to us is, and why it was even drafted with that essentially compelling of speech.
Senator Steinmetz, the
Madam
definition
Chairman?
of entity.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. The entity is fairly broad, and as you know, there are many private contracts, Representative Yin, that could receive federal funds or state funds. Obviously, President Trump is working on private contractors as we speak through his executive orders, because this is designed to take care of funds of any kind being utilized by a government entity. So I think it's a good cleanup, one that we just overlooked in the Senate. So that's what the process is about, is finding those.
Further questions, committee? Representative Klauston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator. So I just got a question this morning from a constituent. Private school, they celebrate a lot of Latino heritage, religious things in their school, and they're receiving ESA funds. So the question from them was something I hadn't considered. Does this bill affect some of the things that they're doing in their private school with their Latino heritage?
Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. No, it's not designed to touch any of that, and I thought we had those exemptions pretty well ferreted out, but if you have something that you feel like would make the bill better in that regard, I'm glad to entertain that amendment.
Further questions, committee? Further discussion on the content of the bill? Okay. I have one question for you, Senator. On page 6, lines 8 through 10, It states an activity of a student organization registered with or recognized by the University of Wyoming or Wyoming Community College. So we're talking about events on campus, not prohibiting them from doing these sort of events is what, the way I take it. I'm just curious, was there any discussion on the other end of the chamber as to whether or not we want to use taxpayer dollars to keep the lights on for these sort of events, keep the room warm for these sort of events, using taxpayer dollars? Senator?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. We did not discuss that. It did not come up. We were just trying to make sure that we respect the freedom of speech of the students. So if you have some conforming language you'd like to bring to say that, no public funds should be used, or they have to use their own money to rent the facility, something like that, I would be open to that discussion.
Thank you. Okay, committee, any further questions for the senator? Okay, seeing none, thank you.
Thank
Don't go
you.
far. We will move on to public comment. I'd like a show of hands in the audience if you plan on testifying on this bill. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and we have a few online too. I am going to limit public comment to 2 minutes for everybody, those online and those in person. First, we'll call up government agencies. Are there any government agencies that would like to testify? Thank you. Okay. Seeing none, members of the public, please come forward. There's 3 chairs up here, so occupy them, and then after public comment, we'll move on to registered lobbyists. So, we have all registered lobbyists. Any members of the public? Okay. 2 more chairs open, so if you're, okay. Ma'am, please state your name and who you're with and your take on the bill.
Good morning, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Patricia McCoy, and I'm here on behalf of all 5 of Moms for Liberty chapters in Wyoming. We are labeled Moms for Liberty Wyoming when we speak on behalf of all of us. And we are in support of Senate File 103. This bill is a strong, practical step towards fairness, merit, and fiscal responsibility, bedrock values Wyoming cherishes. I commend its sponsors for boldly confronting a system that's veered dangerously off course from the principle of equal treatment under the law, a principle we cannot afford to compromise. It firmly addresses the problems of DEI initiatives, programs that shamelessly elevate race, sex, and ethnicity above individual talent and hard work. It shuts the door on giving preference in hiring bases based on these traits, anchoring decisions firmly in merit where they belong, not in arbitrary identity markers. It ties funding to compliance, keeping a firm check on entities like the university, community colleges, and state agencies, ensuring they use taxpayer dollars responsibly rather than on misguided priorities. These measures are vital tools correcting the flaws of DEI and refocusing us on competence and unity, which Wyoming rightfully expects. We did prepare an amendment, which I have provided copies to all of you. On page 2, line 3, under the definition of diversity, equity, and inclusion, add the following. This term also includes any program, policy, or practice, regardless of its title, that seeks to advance the principles of prioritizing group identity over individual merit, or that promotes outcomes based on race, sex, color, ethnicity, or national origin, unless explicitly required by federal law or court order. The reason we are suggesting this is because while this bill targets specific DEI practices like race-based hiring and preferential treatment, crafty bureaucrats could sidestep it by making a new label on the same ideas, swapping DEI for something like access and opportunity or inclusive growth. We've witnessed this shell game before. Tweak a title, soften the wording, and parade it as compliance while the divisive core features sit unchanged.
Ms. McCoy, you are out of time.
Sorry, thank you.
Thank you. Members, you all have a copy of the proposed amendment. Okay, thank you very much. Any questions for Ms. McCoy? Committee? Okay, seeing none, thank you for joining us this morning. So registered lobbyist, please come forward. members of the public, let's fill the chairs. I don't see many people jump into the seats. So please state your name and who you're with, and we'll hear your take on the bill.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My name is Sean Reese. I am the Executive Director of Wyoming Humanities. Wyoming Humanities Council is a 50-year-old organization. We provide funding for museums and historical societies and scholarship for the public. Our mission is to explore the stories and ideas that shape Wyoming. And in these stories often are references to race. Our partners include small hometown museums like the Rockpile Museum at Gillette, Heart Mountain Foundation. We work with professors at the university as well as other professors developing histories of Wyoming. Right now there's an exhibit at the State Museum about Lucinda Phillips, who was an enslaved woman who came to Wyoming and started the African Methodist Episcopal Church, became a businessman. We are defined as an entity according to the statute. We receive some funding that we grant out to museums and historical societies. This bill would prevent us from being able to provide funding for those topics. We would not be able to fund history of the Chinese massacre or Basques in Johnson County.
Or Jews in Wyoming, or the immigrants coming to Rock Springs. This bill would also prohibit us from raising private funds for those same purposes. These we feel are very important stories, and this bill would really impact our ability to share these important and compelling stories of Wyoming's history. And I'd stand for any questions, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Any questions, committee? Representative Clauston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, sir, for your testimony. Looking at this bill, do you have a fix for us? Is there some language in here you think that would help you?
Madam Chairman.
Mr. Reese.
Madam Chairman, thank you. Representative Clauston. I do have some suggestions. The first would be at the bottom of page 2. Line 23, this section about conducting trainings, programs, or activities designed or implemented in reference to race, color, ethnicity, or gender dysphoria. If that word reference were changed to something like preference, I believe that would allow for funding of these types of important histories. Second, on the third page, the definition of entity, which includes corporation. I'm the executive director of a private corporation. That would be a consideration of striking that word corporation. And then the amendment from the sponsor that I believe I understand, I haven't seen it, but adding governmental entity to the section that prohibits non-state funds from going into these projects, that would allow us to privately fundraise for these types of public histories.
Thank you. Further questions, committee? Representative Yin.
Madam Chairman, and just to be clear, you guys are a nonprofit and not a governmental entity?
Mr. Reese.
Madam Chairman, Representative Yin, yes, that is correct. We are a private nonprofit corporation.
Further questions, Vice Chairman Ottman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Reese, could you please repeat the second possible amendment that you mentioned?
Mr. Reese.
Madam Chairman, the first was to change the word reference to something like preference. The second would be to strike corporation from the definition of entity on page 3, line 7.
Further questions, committee? Okay, seeing none, thank you for joining us this morning.
One more thing, Madam Chairman. I appreciate the bill's sponsor for putting in the provisions for Eastern Shoshone and Northern Arapaho tribes. We do a lot of work with groups like Wyoming PBS and the Buffalo Bill Center of the West to develop curriculum around the Indian Education for All Act. And I think that was an important improvement to this bill.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Reese, for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Sir, please state your name, who you're with, and your take on the bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mike Smith with the University of Wyoming. Given the time limit, I'm going to kind of be disorganized and bounce around a little bit, but I guess I just want to make sure at the outset that I let this committee know that there's been a lot of in-depth, hard work done at the University of Wyoming in the last year since that budget amendment, that budget footnote was passed and partially vetoed by the governor. And for brevity's sake, I just explained the university in implementing that budget footnote basically ignored the veto. And we went forward with a process to not only close the Office of DEI, but examine all programs, activities, and other efforts that the legislature included in that footnote. And a year in, we've made great progress in that regard, and should be completing that process of reviewing all programs very shortly. So as to the university, there's been no kind of there's been nothing but doing the hard work to try to implement that law, and many of the provisions of this bill have been implemented already, as well as the president's, the Federal Department of Education's letter that was issued on this topic. The bill itself is, in our view, then unnecessary. It's overly broad. It's not well constructed. I just want to point out a couple things the previous speaker pointed out. The bottom of page 2, the word "in reference to," that would prohibit us from hosting events like the Latina Youth Conference that attracts young women from across this state to come to the university and maybe get exposed to higher education for the first time and to celebrate their heritage. I like deleting "in reference to," which is overly broad and captures everything, and then inserting something like "to provide differential treatment or special benefits based on," instead of "in reference to," which really will focus it on, you're not trying to implement a program that's promoting a particular class over another, but allows you to at least have events that celebrate diversity or cultural heritage. The language on the bottom of page 3 that's, again, brings in donations, endowments, grants, it's overly broad, and would ask you to reconsider that. I'd actually like you to reconsider much of the second half of this bill. If you keep the stuff up front, beginning on page 7, line 13 with Article 20, this really usurps the Board of Trustees' constitutional and statutory responsibility to govern curriculum at the university. It infringes on academic freedom of students and professors. And so,
Mr. Smith, you are
thank
out
you.
of time.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr.
You
Smith,
get the-
excuse me, did you have any amendment handouts for the committee?
I don't have anything handed out, Madam Chair, and I apologize for that.
Okay.
But happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Committee, any questions for Mr. Smith? Okay, seeing none, Mr. Smith, thank you for
Thank you.
joining us this morning. Ma'am, please state your name and who you're with and your take on the bill.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I'm Jody Shields with the Wyoming Nonprofit Network. We are the state association for 501c3 charitable nonprofits. Nonprofits are in the scope of this bill in 2 instances. As was mentioned, the term corporation would include nonprofits who are registered with the Secretary of State as a private corporation. Secondly, on page 3, lines through 8 through 13, we have to consider the effects of nonprofits receiving direct legislative appropriations, and also those securing funding, state or federal, through contracts with state agencies and other governmental entities. So that is why I'm here today, because it does impact my sector. In terms of the impact, as was mentioned before on page 3, lines 20 to 23, talking about the use of funds, including or funds received from requests, charges, donations, et cetera, would directly impact our nonprofits. For nonprofit organizations, donor intent is not only a legal obligation, but an ethical obligation. Donor freedom is a fundamental right protected from under the First Amendment. Just as free speech, charitable giving is also a protected expression. As currently written, the bill restricts how these nonprofits can allocate privately held funds or raised funds, but also those that are self-generated. For these reasons, we ask your consideration in removing the line 22 through the next page, starting with our funds received and ending with activities. Lastly, as mentioned before, page 2, line 23, we would support Mr. Reese's suggestion that the terminology be switched from reference to preference. This would actually align with the word preference on page 4, line 16. We feel that the word reference does provide some unintended consequences for those organizations, including museums, community celebrations that recognize ethnic or other populations that have been instrumental in Wyoming's history and settlement. I would just one more note I wanted to make. The exceptions that start on page 5 are really written specifically to higher education, so we don't see that any of those would apply to our particular industry. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak.
Yeah, thank you for your testimony. Committee, any questions? Okay, seeing none, ma'am, thank you for joining us this morning. Good morning, please state your name and who you're with and your take on the bill.
Hi, good morning, members of the committee, Madam Chairman. My name is Erin Taylor. I am the Executive Director of the Wyoming Association of Community College Trustees. So representing your 8 community college trustees, or excuse me, 8 colleges, 56 elected trustees. Madam Chairman, we have a very similar stance on this bill to the university. In fact, we've been working on this from the beginning to just try and make it livable. And I'm going to say that words matter, and you've heard a lot of testimony today about what these words mean. So the colleges are reading this bill to try and make sure that we can comply. But the colleges are environments of belonging, and more than any other types of institutions, you know, they meet students where they're at. And you know, we're just trying to make sure that what's already happening on their campuses can continue to happen. What's really important, you heard about the language with reference to the tribes. It's also important that you in reference to the trainings. And I'm going to talk about Central Wyoming College specifically because they require trainings for their faculty and their staff on the culture of the tribes. They are a federally Native American serving institution, which is a specific status to serve that population. And so that is very critical that that sort of language stay in there. I would also echo what you've heard on page 2, the words in reference to is so overly broad. We're not sure exactly what that means. Could something be caught in that? We're not sure. We would like to see the words to provide differential treatment or special benefits based on. And that would refer to page 2, line 17, as well as page 2, line 23. So both of those sections. And Madam Chairman, we proposed that to the sponsor, and we're hoping that she might be amenable to that. We thought it would make it absolutely crystal clear on what that might mean. And so we would ask you to consider that. Also on page 3, getting into the issue of private donations is something that I don't believe is the purview of the legislature. And also I wanted to mention real quickly, Madam Chairman, on page 6, I heard a reference to use of public funds for activities or events on campuses. There's a bill to do that already passed the House. And I would submit to you that does not belong in this bill. So, Madam Chairman, I also have a president in the room. If you have any questions, you can refer to him. the president of Eastern Wyoming College, if you have any questions specific to a college. Thank you.
Committee, any questions for Ms. Taylor? Okay, I have one for you. You mentioned the required training in Fremont County at the community college there. Tell me about your thoughts about trainings that are geared towards trying to make staff more culturally competent versus what the intent of DEI is. Your take on that?
Madam Chairman, culturally competent, am I to assume you're saying understanding the culture more? What do you mean by that? Can I ask you that?
Yeah, I can elaborate more. Ms. Taylor, so sometimes when there's certain professions that have more diversity in their communities, more different demographics. Every community has different demographics. And so sometimes employers will require their employees to be more culturally competent so that they can communicate and relate more with the demographics of their community. And so you're talking about a community college and staff and training that's required. I guess my question is it more based on understanding certain cultural practices and ways of life versus requiring people to provide preferential treatment?
Madam Chairman, I thank you for the clarification. I think that's an easy question to answer. It's the first part of what you were referring to. And an example I might give is, as was testified in other committees on this issue, sometimes when there's a death in the family, sometimes the student, there's a lot of obligation to take care of other family members and whatnot. So they might be gone for several days. And that's just one example of learning about the culture of how the families work, when there's situations that are hard for the family. And so it is about learning how the culture works. And there's lots more examples that if I had Dr. Tyndall here, he could give you that, but that's what I'm referring to, if that helps.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor. Any questions? Thank you for joining us
Thank
this
you.
morning. Ma'am, please state your name and who you're with and
Yes,
your
good
take on the
morning.
bill.
And my name's Linda Burt, and I am a registered lobbyist, although I'm not speaking as a lobbyist this morning. I'm speaking for myself. And I'd like to go back just a little bit to affirmative action, which I believe is the parent of DEI. And I remember affirmative action very well because that is a result of why I'm here today, is because of affirmative action. My livelihood today, my lifestyle today, all of those things are a result of affirmative action. Not because I was not smart enough, not because I was not good enough, not because I didn't have the money, which I didn't, but all of those things were true of me when I started school. I could not be a lawyer, I could not be a doctor, I could be a teacher or a nurse. Those two things I could be. Otherwise, I was not going to be allowed to go into those schools in college. When I first wanted to go to law school, the only women that went to law school in Colorado were one or two of the very top students that were allowed into law school, and that's when I first wanted to go. And as we know, some of those, even Supreme Court justices who graduated at the top of their class, were not allowed into big firms. They were asked to be PAs or receptionists after they had graduated law school. I could not get a credit card. I could not rent an apartment in my own name. The reason that I have all the things I have today is because of affirmative action. DEI and affirmative action, neither one were made to allow for preferences. They were allowed to level the playing field for other people. I speak for women and how it affected me. It was a level playing field. What we know today is that playing field is still not level in the state of Wyoming, particularly for women. We can look at the number of women in our legislature, and we know that is true in our legislature. We look at the pay scales for women in our state, and we know that that is still true. Those ideas that say this is a preference for people who are not qualified is not true. It's a level playing field. And I also agree with the fact that this is overly broad, it's poorly constructed, and it may very well be unconstitutional in many areas. Because I did finally get to go to law school in the University of Wyoming, but it took me 30 years to do that. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Burt. Committee, any questions for Ms. Burt? Okay, seeing none, thank you, ma'am, for joining us this morning. Sir, please state your name and who you're with and your take on the bill.
Thank you, Madam Chairman and Committee. My name is Nathan Winters, the President of the Wyoming Family Alliance, and I'm here to rise in support of the well-constructed and focused Senate File 103. And while, as a historian of philosophy and theology, I was very familiar with the theories of the Frankfurt School and critical theory, this issue took on a whole new meaning when the mother of a college student going through the nursing program at the University of Wyoming, it was brought to the forefront of my attention when I saw this text message she sent to me that told the student to describe in a short letter to the editor or the governor the importance of addressing social justice issues that may impact health disparities in your state. Then it said, give an example of a strategy that your community could use, select a specific issue such as racism, lack of access to health care, discrimination, lack of access to free reduced cost meals at lunch, LGBTQ issues, immigration, etc., that you're passionate about. You can make up the issue, and as an example, you can use a transgender child's access to the bathroom at a school. Now, this was given to a young college student who was being told that this was necessary for her to graduate through nursing, or she could suffer the loss or the suffering of a grade. When you look at that at the University of Wyoming, baked into a program such as nursing, which is important, we need to recognize that DEI has buried itself much deeper than just that of an office that has been eliminated. The University of Wyoming requires all undergraduates in its social studies teacher preparation program in the Bachelor of Arts and all students in its Teachers College Master's program to complete a DEI course as a condition of graduation. And despite bland diversity and multicultural labels, UW, their mandatory DEI courses require students to examine the meaning, including the causes and effects of racism, sexism, and other forms of bias. Now, let me just stop right there and say that it is never the intention of this bill, and you can even see it in its construction, that we don't discuss the major issues that the United States of America has faced. What we're saying is that they should not be viewed through the lens of the oppressor-oppressed Marxist dynamic known as the Frankfurt School. So this bill, I believe, is very well constructed. I could go into much greater detail. 2 minutes doesn't allow for that. But with that, Madam Chairman, I would stand for any questions.
Thank you. Committee, any questions of Mr. Winters? Representative Clauston.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Winters, for being here. What are your thoughts? I'm looking at page 1, and right at the top, it's mandates by state agencies and educational institutions. I'm trying to figure out how to protect our private educational institutions. So by state agencies and public education institutions, how would your group feel about that kind of language trying to protect private schools?
Mr. Winters.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And Representative, I believe that the intention that has been brought forward by many individuals is trying to actually show the difference between a public and private institution. I believe also that when you look at some of the contentions people have brought forward, you find on pages 3 and 4, the parts of this are predicated on the language before it. When you look at page 3, you start at line 20, it simply says, as a condition of receiving or expending monies or funds appropriated, each entity shall not expend any appropriated funds or funds received from bequests. So it goes through these different groups, and here's where they are not allowed to expend those. Now, it's to maintain a diversity, equity, or inclusion office, or assign or employer, contracted person. So rather than reading the whole thing, I believe that this bill is fairly focused already. If there is language that can continue to clarify, I think it would be a continuation of a clarification rather than bringing it in for the first time. Because I believe just a clear reading of the bill, and I say this more as a historian, not a lawyer, that I do think that it's still fairly clear here.
Further questions, committee? Okay. Seeing none, Mr. Winters, thank you for joining us this morning. Good morning, former representative. Please state your name and who you're with, and we'll hear your take on the bill.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you, committee. My name is Sarah Burlingame. I'm the Executive Director of Wyoming Equality, and we are in opposition to this bill. Some years ago, the National Guard held a diversity days where they invited a number of different groups to come and speak to what they brought to the community and what they brought to the Guard. And I was particularly impressed with the Brigadier General, who said in the good old bad days, we used to ask everybody to be colorblind. We used to ask everybody to leave their identities at home and come through the door as a blank slate. And what we discovered was it was a poor fighting force, and it was not an effective way to be the most powerful fighting force on the globe. What they learned was that when people were allowed to bring their whole selves through the door, when they were allowed to share their culture, share their food, share their traditions, that it actually made for a more cohesive unit. The good bringer of this bill did note that the carve-out language for the Eastern Shoshone and the Northern Arapaho would mean that their identities would not be erased. But unless you can imagine a reason why other cultures and identities, African Americans, Asian, Hispanic, and any others should be erased, we think you have to resist the language in this bill. In Section A, Romanet 2, related content, it says does not include identifying and discussing historical movements, ideologies, or instances of racial hatred or discrimination, including but not limited to slavery, Indian removal, the Holocaust, or Japanese American internment. So you've placed educators in an untenable position. They have to teach that they happened, but they are not allowed to teach why they happened. And as any kind of historian or teacher, I think that doesn't work. So our schools have students from rich cultural heritage, stripping them of their rights to bring their whole selves through the door. It doesn't just harm them, it harms us. It harms our communities and our abilities to learn from each other. It's chilling to imagine that a freedom-loving people, like we are, could turn so quickly against our neighbors in service of what I am very sorry to say sounds like a white nationalist agenda. So I'm asking you to vote no against this, and I would stand for any questions, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you. Any questions? Ms. Burlingame. Okay, seeing none. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Anybody else like to come forward? Good morning. Please state your name and if you represent a group, and we'll hear your take on the bill for 2 minutes.
John B. Romero Martinez, House District 44, and I represent an open source group by the name of the Wyoming Purple Cross, and I support this bill as it's written. If there is an amendment that needs to be added with the assistance of the bringer of the bill regarding the Latino culture, that's been mentioned a few times as a Latino. I just wanted to share a brief synopsis. Not only did I serve with you in these joint bodies, I've been eternally frustrated with people who try to speak for the Latino people that don't know the Latino culture. Absent from the University of Wyoming in their programming, through my brief attendance there, I do support the Mecha Group, the Movimiento Estudiantil Chicano de Aztlán, that represents the history of the Aztec people and the 19 Uto Azteca speaking tribes throughout the Mesoamerica that exist still today in the Eastern Shoshone and what is originally the Eastern Shoshone Reservation. That renaming was later. There's also, it's been mentioned 2 or 3 times, the tribes. It's already been proven through FOIA that with regards to the tribes, the Northern Arapaho is not a federally recognized tribe. That documentation can be found in that committee. I respect both tribes, but the language regarding true and accurate history might be able to be referred to in another bill, but I don't want to distract or detract from this bill. It's well constructed. I'm not going to go into a whole history because there's clearly not enough time, but I do believe, Madam Chair, that it's well constructed. We all know that the legislative staff here in LSO, they don't just put together cookie cutter or non-well thought out bills. in regards to the community college, as a graduate of Laramie County Community College, what I found from the 90s to 98 is while I supported diversity issues, and I think we all respect cultural diversity, what ended up happening was with the Latino community and the Black community and other minority communities, we were pushed to the bottom where the LGBTQ was pushed to the top. And all you have to do is look at the records for the Student Senate. I support this bill. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, and forgive me for not recognizing you as former Representative
No
John
problem.
Romero Martinez.
Thank you, Madam.
Committee, any questions? Representative Yan.
Thank you.
Oh, don't go far.
John, please. Apologies, former Representative Romero Martinez, thank you. Madam Chairman, former Rep. Romero Martinez, do you think that it should be optional to learn about racism for an educator?
Mr. Romero Martinez.
Optional to learn about racism as an educator? I mean, racism is real, but the most heinous form of racism that this world has ever seen has been the abortion industry. And so I would say yes, but I would strongly include the concept of the eugenics movement, which has been non-existent in history. I also think that in regards to the Latino community, has been a lot of racism against our community. Same thing is true with the First Nations. So I would say yes, but with the inclusion of eugenics, which has been way overlooked at both levels of junior college and college.
Follow-up, Representative Yan?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. So the course that the sponsor of the bill brought up was about multicultural education for an MA in education. So it's a master's that our educators would need to get. And she was arguing that part of the bill's intent was to ensure that a course like that isn't required for a master's in education. Do you think, so you're saying that we should teach racism? We should teach educators about the history of racism, or we should not, or we should not be required to do that?
Mr. Romero Martinez.
I kind of go back to my original comment of, and I agree with the former Representative Winters, who also mentioned the Marxist-Leninist overtones of the current status. That, I don't know if I'm answering your question, so I apologize, but I would say that, again, if it's including the eugenics movement, what we've done to our culture and what we need to reverse is almost, it's very challenging. Even China has turned back their one-child policy, and we need to relook at things. I'm not opposed to the concept, but I think it needs to be cleaned up. I don't think that it's far off. I think it's good the way it is. There could be an amendment brought on first read or something. So don't know if that would be between the sponsor of the bill and the legislature and your committee.
Thank you. Further questions? Okay, seeing none. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you, ma'am.
Ma'am, please state your name and who you're with and your take on the bill.
Hi, I'm Sherry Davis from Crook County. I appreciate you looking at this bill today, and I am in support of it. What the bill titles that it intends to do, it's actually done the opposite. It's very divisive. My son happens to be Afro-American, and he went to the bank where he was waited on by our friend's daughter who was teaching at the university. And he comes home and says, "You can tell she feels sorry for me," because he was Black, right? And I says, "Well, did you say anything to her?" He says, "No, I thought it was really funny." I says, "Well, what do you think of all this?" He says, "We all bleed red." We used to be a merit system. We are the great melting pot. Instead of focusing on our differences, let's focus on what we all have to offer. And so I'm a registered nurse and a lactation counselor, and in order to keep my license, I have to do ongoing education. So there's free ongoing education available. But in order to take that, I had to listen to 2 paragraphs read of how we are a colonialist white, which is the standard of beauty, and all other cultures are oppressed. You know, what are we doing? What are we saying? and this is going into our youth. And it causes me concern that our teachers have been trained up in this who are training our children, right? If the University of Wyoming had to make a lot of changes to keep getting their money and conform to what was right, it's only because they felt threatened of a law or funding, right? He said he made changes. He says he don't want it. I think without this bill turning into law, we don't know where it's going to continue. There's people that believe what they've been told. Let's tell people the value of working together. We voted in a Black president. Why? Some people because he was Black. That is not racist, right? Some people voted for him on merit. We should always be considered for the work we do on our merit. Let's keep that center, and thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Davis? Okay, thank you for joining us this morning. Right, we'll move into online testimony. Mr. Caldwell, if there's anybody still there.
Yes, first is Melissa Begler. She's ready to testify.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My name is Melissa Behringer, and I live in Casper. I believe SF 103 is misguided and will not only hurt students in primary and secondary education, but will also deeply damage the University of Wyoming. The concept of DEI has been turned from an altruistic idea to help us all see the humanity in one another into a boogeyman term used to demonize the other. So many people have accepted DEI as negative by people that are pushing hate and fear over compassion and understanding. Senator Steinmetz mentioned that it will not affect the accreditation of our university for some of our programs, but I'm not so sure. I speak for myself as a student currently in my last semester of the Masters of Social Work program at the University of Wyoming. It is nationally accredited, and I'm concerned that SF 103 could cause our university to lose its national accreditation. My degree might be safe, but what about the sophomore and the bachelor's program? What about the out-of-state students who will no longer come to Wyoming? Our values include service, social justice, importance of human relationships, dignity and worth of all people, and integrity. These are all words that are now being demonized as woke by those pushing to scare and divide us. Please recognize that social workers are the helpers. We are the ones trying to bridge the divide and lift up all people. We are the ones that choose to work with these vulnerable populations. We want to work to include everyone. We want to learn and understand diverse perspectives. We want to offer support to those experiencing social problems. Our communities and state need and deserve social workers and to have programs that produce effective social workers. Trying to erase DEI efforts may have the unintended consequence of hurting our university through the loss of accreditation for important programs. Let's have a conversation about how to understand DEI efforts and how to make them better. This legislation has the potential to cause irreparable damage to our state and our university. Please vote no on SF 103. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Committee, any questions for Ms. Behringer? Okay, seeing none, thank you for joining us this morning.
Next is Bianca Infante.
Okay.
Hello, my name is Bianca Infante. Good morning, Madam Chairman, sorry. My name is Bianca Infante. I'm an alumni from the University of Wyoming. I grew up in Jackson, and I'm currently living in Laramie, Wyoming. I am here to ask you to vote no on this bill. The reason why I'm asking you that is because as a Latina woman, as a Mexican woman coming to the university, I've utilized services that were already dismantled at the university when I was a student. And I benefited from them to receive resources from staff, faculty, and student orgs. I know one of the bills is asking that one of the sections asking the student orgs stay, that they don't get affected by this bill. However, as a previous MECHA member, we utilize the feedback and support from faculty and members. And so one question is, if students have questions about how to move their organization forward or feedback, and they're not doing it during the classroom, are they going to be affected by this bill? I, as a person who is proud to demonstrate my culture and my identity, I feel that this bill is just causing more harm. Thank you.
Thank you. Committee, any questions of Ms. Infante? Okay, seeing none, thank you for joining us this morning.
Last is Sarah Chapman.
Good morning, Ms. Chapman.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee for the opportunity to comment today. I am Sarah Chapman, the Chief Operating Officer at the Wyoming Community Foundation. We are a statewide nonprofit that supports communities by connecting private dollars to community impact through charitable grants. While we are generally opposed to this bill, what I'd like to focus on today are supporting two amendments that we feel like would provide clarity to the bill. First, the term corporations included in the bill is problematic, and perhaps unintentionally, nonprofits like my organization as corporations would be negatively impacted by this bill as written. As suggested earlier, we recommend the term corporations be removed from the definition of entity. Second, we appreciate Senator Steinmetz's amendment to add the term governmental in the bottom of page 3, but would encourage the committee to take it further, considering the Wyoming Nonprofit Network's amendment, which removes the other sources of private funding and prevents them from being controlled. Donors and non-governmental funders like private foundations are passionate about their charitable causes, and dictating what nonprofits do with those privately secured funding from various sources is detrimental to our work. My organization holds charitable assets in more than 400 different funds and has granted more than $100 million across Wyoming to any number of charitable causes. The wording currently is very problematic for our ability to support the public-private partnerships that our state so desperately relies on to build our communities. We're asking for your opposition to this bill, but if you feel you cannot vote no, please vote to move forward these amendments. Thank you. I'll stand by for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Chapman. Committee, any questions, Ms. Chapman? Okay, seeing none, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Okay, right, that's it. I will close public comment on Senate File 103. Committee, what is your pleasure? Okay, the bill has been moved by Representative Gugamas, second by Representative McCann. Discussion and amendments, committee. Representative Vian.
Madam Chairman, on page 3, line 21, between each entity, the words each entity, insert governmental. That's my motion.
Is there a second? The amendment's been moved by Representative Yin, second by Representative Wasserberger. Mr. Caldwell, do you have that? Okay, discussion on the amendment. Representative Haft.
Madam Chairman, Representative Yin, could you repeat that amendment, please?
Madam Chairman,
Representative Yin.
on page 3, line 21. So we see monies or funds appropriated each entity. So between the words each and entity, insert governmental. So it would read each governmental entity. And Madam Chairman, the intent of that is to make this apply to only governmental entities and not private institutions.
Further discussion on the amendment? Okay, sensing the urge to vote by a show of hands and a voice vote, all those in favor of Representative Yin's amendment, please state aye. Aye. All opposed? Okay, that amendment has passed. Committee, further discussion, further amendments on the bill. Representative Clouston.
Madam Chair, thank you. And committee, I'm looking at, just again, trying to make sure that we're covering public education and not private education institutions here. So page 1, line 3. It would read efforts and mandates by state agencies and then include public education institutions. So my amendment is simply adding public after and, page 1, line 3.
Is there a second? Okay. Amendment's been moved by Representative Clouston, second by Representative Yin. Mr. Caldwell, do you have that? Okay. Discussion on the amendment? Or need for further clarification? Or questions? Okay, question being called. All those in favor of Representative Clouston's amendment by a show of hands and a voice vote, please state aye. Aye. All opposed? No. Okay, that amendment has passed. Further amendments, further discussion on the bill. Representative Yin.
Madam Chairman, on page 2, so we heard from both the universities and the community colleges wanting to have this language a little different because it wasn't clear. So strike in reference to and put to provide differential treatment or special benefits to persons on basis of. So basically, similar language that's on page, on lines 12 and 13.
Okay, Representative Yin, so you're inserting on page 2, line 12,
Sorry, on line 23.
on line 23, page 2, you're inserting,
Strike out in preference to, and then replace that with to provide differential treatment or special benefits to persons on basis of. So it would read, conducting trainings, programs, or activities designed or implemented to provide differential treatment or special benefits to persons on basis of race, color, ethnicity, or gender dysphoria.
okay, that's been moved, that amendment has been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, seconded by Representative Clouston. Mr. Caldwell, do you have the language for that? Okay. Discussion on the amendment. Vice Chair Ottman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question. Since it is already in B and is lined out in the document as for the different things, there had been a different suggestion for line 23 that was a lot simpler and wasn't repetitive of something that already was stated. So is all that necessary?
Madam Chairman,
Representative Yen and committee, I have invited the bill sponsor to come back up. So if you do have questions for her as we work the bill, please.
So Madam Chairman,
Representative Yen.
I'm happy, it would be friendly to me if it's friendly to the second to just change that to in preference to rather than all that other language. So it would read in preference to race. If the second's okay with that.
Okay, so that's a friendly amendment. Mr. Caldwell, do you have the change?
Just to clarify, that's a friendly amendment to just say, replace the language with preference?
Yep. Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And if I could direct your attention to the second amendment I provided to you, which is proposed amendment 305 to SF 103. That was provided to us by the community colleges. It takes all, I was just doing half of it, but after hearing their testimony, I think it will help the bill. So if you want to just take that whole amendment, it would be page 2, line 17 in reference to, delete in reference to and insert to provide differential treatment or special benefits based on, and then the same language on page 2, line 23. And then it would also include page 8, line 4, behind related content and insert means instruction advocating the concepts prohibited by 9.2.10.14.4. I would ask you to leave the subsection B out and have it apply to the whole section, but Representative Ian, I hope that helps with your amendment. It might be something you want to consider moving the entire thing.
Representative Yan.
Madam Chairman, thank you. Sure. If it's friendly to my second, I'll move the proposed,
Do you want to withdraw this?
so I'll withdraw, well, yeah, let's make it simple. I'll withdraw my amendment and move Steinmetz's proposed S0305.
Okay, the amendment has been withdrawn. Mr. Caldwell, do you have a copy of the amendment?
Yes, Madam Chairman, I do have a copy.
Okay.
And there's some X's on the amendment. Are we just incorporating all of everything written here? Okay.
Yep. Okay, so let's move the amendment. Representative Yan.
Madam Chairman, I move that amendment.
The amendment's been moved by Representative Yan and seconded by Representative Klauston. Discussion on the amendment. Seeing none. Okay, by a show of hands and a voice vote, all those in favor of Representative Yan's proposed amendment, please state aye. Aye. All opposed? Okay, that amendment has passed. Committee, further amendments, further discussion on the bill. Representative Klauston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will move an amendment that was brought up to the committee. Page 3, line 22, striking the language after funds. And striking that language till page 4, line 2, after that. So it would read, as a condition of receiving or expending any monies or funds appropriated, each entity shall not expend any appropriated funds unless federal law otherwise requires. So this is taking out the concern language on grants, donations, endowments that was mentioned earlier.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, the amendment's been moved by Representative Klauston, second by Representative Yan. Mr. Caldwell, do you have the language?
Madam Chairman, Representative Klauston, could you repeat the amendment one more time?
Yes, so the amendment, page 3, line 22, we would keep in any appropriated funds, and then we would strike the language starting with or. Language would be struck through page 4, line 2, ending at that. So unless federal law otherwise requires, would still be in there. Thanks.
Okay, discussion committee on the amendment. Vice Chair Ottman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a point of clarification again. If we're looking at it as a condition of receiving or expending any monies or funds appropriated, each entity shall not expend any appropriated funds. If we're taking out, or if we're looking at certain public institutions and things like that that are receiving things, part of that is endowments and grants and things like that. So I would ask the bringer if that totally negates the purpose or what. Thank you.
Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And I just want to be clear, we've inserted each governmental entity into that, right? You've got that. So, Madam Chairman, I would prefer if you were doing that you would go up and just take out the corporation, partnership, or person in entity rather than, because I would rather see the governmental entity be under this subsection. So if you are wanting to do that, it would be more favorable to go up into the definition of entity and take out those words rather than adjust it here with regard to the, and that would be okay. It may not be perfect, but if that's what the will of the committee is, that's what I would suggest.
Representative Klauston.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator. So, yeah, I brought that based on some of the discussion that came up, but actually, that was really, my next amendment was exactly what you just spoke of, so.
So, Madam Chairman, Representative
Senator
Klauston,
Steinmetz.
I think that would take care of it, and you could leave the government alone, if that makes sense.
Madam Chairman.
Representative Yen.
Yeah, I do think that language in the amendment still needs to be removed because it still affects donors, how donors can direct their funds to a governmental entity, and it restricts basically the donor's intent, if the donor intended to use it on activities that would otherwise be prohibited. So I think it should stay specifically on appropriated, so taxpayer funds. But I think donor funds should be allowed to do what the donor wishes. I think that's important. So I do think the language should still be removed.
Further discussion on the amendment?
Madam Chairman.
Senator.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I would just address that in the fact that when you're dealing with a governmental entity, their staff time, everything that they're doing to administer those funds or create that program is still a tax-funded provision because they don't exist without taxpayer funds. And so that would be my one concern with that.
Okay, additional discussion, committee, on the amendment? Okay, sensing the urge to vote by a show of hands and a voice vote, all those in favor of Representative Clouston's amendment, state aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
No.
No. Okay, that amendment has failed. Further amendments, committee discussion. Representative Clouston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that on page 3, line 7, we strike corporation, partnership, and person. So it would read, entity means any government unit, special district that receive a legislative appropriation. So I guess after government unit, let's take away the comma and add or. So it'll read, means any governmental unit or special district that will receive a legislative appropriation.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, the amendment's been moved by Representative Clouston, second by Representative Yin. Mr. Caldwell, do you have that language? Thank you. Committee discussion on the amendment.
So Madam Chairman.
Representative Yin.
Yeah, I actually think we don't need the definition of entity at all, given that governmental entity is really, that where we amended it is really the only place where entity is actually used. So amendment doesn't really matter because governmental entity in that one line has restricted the types of entities anyways, but I think it's a good cleanup, but we probably don't even need that whole section 2 anymore.
Further discussion on the amendment? Representative Wasserberger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My concern with the amendment there is if we're giving out appropriations to corporations or things like that, I would imagine if we're expecting that to be the standard for our government entities, that the people that are receiving appropriations would probably have to be under a similar thing, considering there'd be kind of a conflict if we're appropriating to those corporations. And we're saying that from the government standpoint that that we're gonna abide by this, I would imagine our appropriations would have that same standard. So that's my concern with the amendment.
Further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of Representative Clouston's amendment, by a show of hands and a voice vote, please state aye.
Aye.
All opposed? No. Okay, that amendment has failed. Committee, further amendments, further discussion. Representative Yin.
If we're on discussion, Madam Chairman, if no one else has amendments.
Representative Gugmas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just kind of want to take a look at this other proposed amendment on page 2, line 3. So after the diversity, equity, inclusion, including this term also includes any program, policy, or practice regardless of its title that seeks to advance the principles of prioritizing group identity or individual merit, or that promotes outcomes based on race, sex, color, ethnicity, or national origin. unless explicitly ordered by federal law or court order. I just kind of wanted to discuss that, see if that would, when I read that, it kind of brings clarity to me, to my mind, and how that's put forward. So I'll propose that amendment. I'll move it. Yes.
Okay, the amendment's been moved by Representative Gumas, seconded by Vice Chairman. Mr. Caldwell, do you have that handout? Okay. Committee discussion on the amendment. Representative Gumas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The only concern I have is the last "or court order" language, just because of sometimes our courts tend to overstep their bounds, and I'm concerned with that language. So I would like that to not be included.
Okay, so omitting "or court order" from the proposed amendment, is that a friendly amendment to the second? Vice Chairman Ottman?
Yes.
All right, further discussion on the moved amendment. Representative Ian.
Madam Chairman, I think if the definition was only that, I think that would actually make more sense. I think the issue with the whole bill, frankly, is that diversity, equity, inclusion can mean very different things to very many different people. And the way that the definition is saying it includes any of the following, but does not necessarily preclude or not include whatever people could think it is. So I could think of any definition for diversity, equity, inclusion, including the one proposed in the amendment. So not for or against the amendment, just discussion on this particular portion anyways, that this is part of the broad issue where no one really knows, which is why we have all the concerns from the tribes, we have the concerns from the university, we have the concerns from community college, because it's a wide swath that could mean many things to many different people.
Further discussion on the amendment. Okay, seeing none, sensing the urged vote, all those in favor, well, by a show of hands and a voice vote, all those in favor of Representative Gugamas's amendment, please state aye. Aye. All opposed? Okay, that amendment has passed. Further amendments, discussion. Representative Clouston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Committee, just trying to separate private funds and our public funds. Since on page 3, we didn't accept a corporation partnership or person part that we had discussed. Page 3, line 22, remove bequests. Page 3, line 23, remove donations and endowments. And then page 4, line 1, gifts. So removing these private funds as far as bequests, donations, endowments, and gifts. And then all the public funds would be remaining in the language. Thank you, Madam Chair. So I move that amendment, deleting that language.
Is there a second? Second by Representative Yin. Mr. Caldwell, do you have that?
Madam Chairman, just to repeat the amendment, that is starting on page 3, line 22, through page 4, line 1, just deleting the words bequests, donations, endowments, and gifts.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, committee discussion on the proposed amendment. Vice Chair Ottman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Is that, how would those things be differentiated in their disbursement or receiving?
Representative Clouston.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Vice Chair. So serving on some nonprofits in the past, we have certain things that come in for certain reasons. They may say, we want these private funds. On the board I was, we wanted this to go to cancer care, or, and we also receive public funds that maybe would be used for other things. But often we would receive, gifts, donations that were specific to a certain cause.
Committee, additional questions? Discussion? Okay, Vice Chairman Oppen?
If I could just ask the bringer, does that enhance the bill at all?
Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Representative Ottman. Well, we have changed that to a governmental entity now. So it's not a charitable organization, or it's not a, I mean, assuming that that passes on the floor. So the policy question for the committee is, should a governmental entity take a donation and then use it for DEI? That's the policy question for the committee.
Committee, further discussion. Representative McCann.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to add to that Senator Steinmetz' testimony that if it's a governmental entity that takes public funds, that kind of closes the door on that. So I just want to, they're already taking government funds, so they should have to abide by that. If that makes sense. Anyway, sorry.
Further discussion? Okay. Seeing none. All right. By a voice vote and a show of hands, all those in favor of Representative Clouston's amendment, please state aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
No.
No. Okay, that bill, or that amendment has failed. Additional amendments, additional discussion on the bill. Representative Yin.
Madam Chairman, thank you. So members, we had a bill that passed out of our chamber that came from the other side that said compelled speech is not free speech. And it was about restricting governmental entities from forcing their employees to say certain things. And we have a bill that does the opposite. This is us compelling the government, our government employees, our Board of Trustees, our community colleges, the University of Wyoming, to only say certain things. I think this is a censorship bill. I mean, I think it's clearly a censorship bill. I'm glad that we took out censorship of private entities, but we still censor private entities with the donation part failing. And so definitely on and against the bill. I get the ideology, but I don't understand why we would legislate the compelling of speech. So, thank you, Madam Chairman.
Further discussion on the bill. Vice Chair Ottman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I would just say, when looking at that, I don't believe it's censoring as much as it is limiting requirements.
Further discussion on the bill. Representative Wasserberger.
As far as this bill goes, there's some comments made on if this is gonna be taking us back a little bit as far as how far we've come in equality and things like that. And honestly, I think that this would actually help with improving the equality. You see, there's a lot of, and I've seen that a lot with employers now where they're basing it off of exactly what the intent of this bill is to do. And so it's focused on that rather than the job performance. And so I think with this, I think it's actually going to help with that equality.
Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none. Question being called by Vice Chair Ottman. Mr. Caldwell, if you'd call the roll on Senate File 103.
This is a roll call vote for Senate File 103 as amended. Representative Clouston.
Aye.
Representative Guggenmoss.
Aye.
Representative Heft. Representative McCann. Representative Ottman.
Aye.
Representative Stivar. Representative Wasserberger. Representative Yin.
No.
Chairman Rodriguez Williams. Madam Chairman, that is 7 aye, 1 no, and 1 excused.
Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. Senator Steinmetz, if you would find somebody on the House side to carry your bill, that would be great. You do have another bill that the committee will hear, and I'd like to have you introduce it as we do have time. Committee, I'll now place Senate File 125 on the table for the committee's consideration. This bill's titled Defining Healthcare and Protecting the People's Welfare, sponsored by Senator Steinmetz. Please, if you would walk us through the bill.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Senator Sherry Steinmetz, Senate District 3 again. And this is a pretty simple little bill. This is going into the common law and rules of construction in state law and defining healthcare there. And so what we're doing is we're basically just mirroring the Life as a Human Right Act in this different place in statute. And this has basically been made into a trigger bill so that we do not affect the court case that is going on right now with the Life as a Human Right Act, but it is designed to go into effect either March 12th of 2026 or the date on which the Wyoming Supreme Court renders a decision on the constitutionality of the Life as a Human Right Act. Whichever is sooner is what will go into effect, the earlier date. So if you go into the bill, basically the top of page 2, you have the definitions, which is 356122AI. That is the definition of abortion as contained in the Life as a Human Right Act. Madam Chairman, I could read that to you or just trust that you read it on your own last night. And then for the purposes of this section, actions specified in 356124 shall be construed as healthcare, and that is the definition of performing a pre-viability separation. It's basically the exceptions of the Life as a Human Right Act. So a pre-viability separation, medical treatment to a pregnant woman that results in accidental or unintentional injury or death of the unborn baby. There are some other exemptions as far as incest or sexual assault, to perform an abortion on a woman when it is in the reasonable medical judgment, there's a substantial likelihood the unborn baby has a lethal fetal abnormality or the pregnancy is determined to be a molar pregnancy. And then it does say that if there's nothing in this act shall be construed to prohibit the use, sale, prescription, or administration of a contraceptive measure, drug, chemical, or device. So basically, if it excludes contraception. So that is the bill. It's pretty straightforward and simple, and I'd stand for any questions.
Thank you, Senator. And committee, we do have a amendment from LSO. Correct, Mr. Caldwell? But
Yes, Madam Chairman, it's a technical correction.
yeah, a technical correction amendment that should be in your folders. And I'll go ahead and just state real quick what that does. It's on page 1, line 1. After relating to, we insert the Wyoming Constitution. On page 1, line 3 would delete providing findings and specifying exceptions. So a technical correction. Any questions of Senator Steinmetz on the bill? Representative Yin.
Madam Chairman, Senator, I'm not sure what the point of the bill is. So what's the point of putting it in rules of construction if all it does is just repeat what we have in 356122? What does the bill do?
Senator Steinmetz.
Madam Chairman, Representative Yin, the common law and rules of construction in the state of Wyoming are the overarching rules of common law for the state of Wyoming. So it puts it in a different section rather than the abortion section where it's confined to one area and makes it an overarching policy of the state of Wyoming.
Committee, any additional questions of the bill sponsor? Representative Heft.
Madam Chairwoman and Representative, excuse me. In its present form, we're going to rely on a statute that has been deemed unconstitutional by a lower court. And I know we spoke a little bit about this, but my thought is that if we could bring about a substitution bill, we could put some teeth in this and add that language into our, well, basically our green books. And we wouldn't be relying on a court to overturn, which is doubtful by the climate that we've had in our courts in the state. And what's your, I'd like to get your thoughts on that again, expand on that.
Senator Steinmetz.
Madam Chairman, Representative Hoft. So there are legal minds at work here helping with this bill. And in the Senate, we concluded jointly that we did not want to affect the court case with what was happening right now or reset the clock in some way that would put us another 2 years behind. Thus, that is the trigger nature of the bill. We'll either be back in session and can deal with what's happening, which is the March date that is anticipated, or if that court case would be decided and go into effect, then this would take effect. Now, we did contemplate at one point typing out all of the provisions of the Life is a Human Right Act and putting them in there in case the court case failed and there, that statute was found unconstitutional. But at the end of the day, we thought we would either be back in session to deal with it, or this would just take effect immediately.
Follow-up or further discussion? Follow-up, Representative Heft.
So I guess I'm trying to wrap my mind around, forgive me, Madam Chairwoman, Senator. So our Wyoming Constitution allows the legislature to make definitions relating to what is and is not healthcare. My thought that would give us an option to do that and put a definition of what healthcare is and accomplish it that way without relying on a court.
Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Madam Chairman and Representative Hoff. I would be glad to visit with you. It's a long conversation to be had about the different renditions of this bill and how that was contemplated in the beginning. At the end of the day, the Senate decided not to go that route, and that's pretty much all I can tell you as far as we debated it immensely in committee and on the floor. And this is just the direction we decided to go. And I know we've talked at my desk about all the renditions of this bill and how we came to this final form. But ultimately, that is the work of the Senate. The bill is in the House now, and it is up for your working on it.
Follow-up or further discussion? Representative Heft.
Madam Chairwoman, Senator, thank you.
Further questions for the bill sponsor? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Senator. Don't go far.
All right.
We'll go ahead and open it up for a few minutes for public comment. If you can raise your hands if you plan on testifying on this bill. 1, 2, 3, 4 in the audience, and I think we've got a couple online. Nope, okay. So any government agencies in the audience today that would like to come forward? Okay, seeing none, please, members of the public, please come forward. We have 3 chairs up here. We'll hear some testimony. All right, we've got one more chair if there's one more of you that wants to come up. Ma'am, please state your name and if you're with an organization, and we'll hear your testimony on the bill. And if you, all of you would just keep it succinct, that way we can hear all of you before we have to reconvene, that would be great.
Hi, Sherry Davis with Crook County. Just thank you for having this bill. Healthcare is defined as doing no harm. And so when you end a life, which is clear scientifically with definite evidence that that is what takes place during abortion, that is not healthcare. It might be a choice of an individual. And further, if you look at the statistics, they're the less cared for women that there are. The post-abortion statistics of mental health, drug and alcohol abuse is really huge. And we don't have any follow-up. I mean, there's exceptions of follow-up, but not really in our medical system. It's usually private agencies that reach out to these women. And so let's just be honest about it. And I support the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee for Ms. Davis? Okay, seeing none, thank you for joining us this morning. Sir, please state your name and who you're with and your take on the bill.
Good morning, Drake Hill. I wanted to point out this morning the fatal flaw of the bill. The flaw of the bill, as it stands now, is it relies upon definition taken from a currently, and I emphasize the word currently, unconstitutional statute. We have a district court who is, in my view, unwisely ruled that the statute that this bill relies upon is unconstitutional. So when you point back to definitions in the to the statute that is currently having been declared to be unconstitutional, and by the way, the district court has enjoined the enforcement of that statute, then what you are presented with this morning is a nullity. You don't have the ability this morning to be relying upon a definition which at the district court level has been declared to be unconstitutional. I attribute that to perhaps oversight or inadvertence on the part of LSO or others, rather than as a deliberate subterfuge. So we'll go with the innocent explanation, but this bill does nothing. And that's it is not the typical approach of the legislature to take ineffectual actions. We have worked with members of this community, or committee rather, to offer a substitution of language that in fact does as Representative Heft has suggested, which is making what is ineffectual here come into effect through substitute language. We'd hope you would consider that. Now, among the ideas that have been floated are to take the opportunity to define the unborn as a person, which, by the way, is a critical element missing at the district court level. How could you possibly not define or understand that the unborn is a person? And yet, the only attention paid by the district court was to the mother, giving no consideration to the unborn. If you were to recognize that the unborn is a person, which of course, I think anybody who is pro-life would come to that conclusion immediately, then you would also recognize that that person is entitled to full protection of healthcare. The most basic of which, most fundamental of which, would be to not have that life taken by an elective abortion. And so there is language that we have offered, and there are exceptions, including the life of the mother, the standard ones, and also life-saving or life-terminating life support, rather, which is pretty standard. And then also we have suggested language that that goes to what is healthcare, what is not, and meaning that no act or treatment that would intentionally terminate life, with the exceptions I've specified, can be considered healthcare. Now, these amendments, these suggestions then place this subject on a proper legal footing, something that is effective, because it doesn't rely on a presently ruled unconstitutional set of definitions. Now, we all hope, I hope, well, many of us in this room hope that the Wyoming Supreme Court reverses the district court and that we have a statute that becomes effective again. But this statute, as it stands right now, simply is not effective because it relies upon what is currently, and again, unwisely, ruled to be unconstitutional. I would elaborate on the necessity for the language, but I think the committee is fully aware of why we need these definitions. By placing it in the definitional sections of the statutes, courts are bound by law to adhere to those definitions. Article 1, Section 38, subsection C, provided, and this is, remember, that was a constitutional amendment that the people of Wyoming adopted. And subsection C of that said that the legislature may make definitions. And in fact, it looked to the legislature to make definitions. That's precisely what you would be doing this morning through the substitute language would have effect legally, rather than having an ineffective act, something going through that would have no effect whatsoever. So we urge the committee to take up what would be effective legally, rather than doing an ineffectual act.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. Committee, any questions of Mr. Hill? Representative Clauston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Hill, for your testimony. Can you speak to something we've heard about previously in this committee is, a pregnant woman is in a car wreck, her and the unborn child die. The manslaughter then is for two persons, right? And not just one. But yet when we're dealing with an abortion, it's not counted as a person. So just from the legal side, can you kind of talk about that situation? Thank you.
Mr. Hill.
Chair and Representative Clausen, I'm so grateful for the question because I was afraid maybe I was running out of time and I didn't get into that subject in hearing to the rule limitations. I heard somebody on the Senate side, not the sponsor of this bill, talk about how there's not a child until the birth takes place. Well, as it so happens this morning, I'm scrolling through my news feed, and the news feed pops up with a rare degenerative spinal condition that for a baby was treated in the womb. And the treatment was successful. The child is now 2 years old, and the degenerative disease, as having been originally treated in the womb, is then greatly benefited by that treatment. The law that you're referring to for criminal purposes is well-founded on the basis that we are dealing with a person in the womb, which we've suggested that this substitute language be brought forward, and that the person is entitled to rights. There are the senator that I'm not referencing by name voted for that very legislation and yet favors abortion. That same senator has favored a protection of the child in the womb in the case of drug or alcohol abuse, which we clearly know harms the child, and yet favors abortion. Irreconcilable positions on the part of that one senator. I would suggest that your thought process is exactly correct, that it meets with the common sense recognition that we have a person in the womb as of conception, and that person should be, as in this context, entitled to full protection of their health care. Because that is a person who should, like you and I, be entitled to health care protection. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Committee, any further questions of Mr. Hill? Hey, Mr. Hill, just for clarification, the language that you're referring to in your testimony as suggested changes, did you provide that information to our secretary or?
I don't know if Representative Heft has provided it or not.
Okay, thank you.
I certainly think that we have extra copies for anybody who doesn't
Yeah,
have one.
Thank you. And-
Chairman, Representative Yen had a question.
Sure, Representative Yen, if you.
Madam
Still do.
Chairman, I do, thank you. Madam Chairman, thank you, Mr. Hill. So when we passed the last abortion ban, we had that trigger ban that was on the books previously, and what had happened is that it made the trigger ban, abortion ban moot, and then it actually prolonged the current court case to where we are now. Are you worried that putting this substitute language in would prolong the court case even further?
I am not.
Mr. Hill.
Chair and Representative Yen, I am not in the least, and I appreciate the question. Senator Steinmetz talked about the long history that led us to the point where we are on this language, and it frankly was a tortured drafting history in which there were 1,000 chefs in the kitchen, and they all had to take their whack with a knife and pare this thing down to nothingness. We have a bill that is absolutely meaningless here. And I suppose, all by good intention, there's a lot of territorial aspects that went into that. But we have what we have today, which is not good. I am not concerned with as to your question, with delaying the court case. Because these are definitions that would be supplied by statute that the court can either look at or not for those who are disposed to the preservation of life. These definitions are in perfect lockstep with life principles. They are on all fours. A person, protection of that person's health care, not allowing abortion as masquerading under health care. We had a district court, with all due respect to the district court, I can find disagreement with her decision that she took, misapplied the Wyoming Constitution to a place where it was never intended, Article 1, Section 38, to then achieve a result. And that result is now before the courts. Not concerned in the least that it's going to slow down the court. The case has been briefed and argued, and I think that an immediate effective date is entirely appropriate. If the court cares to look at these definitions, it will. If it doesn't care to look at these definitions, then it won't. But we will have, in the interim, something in place that has the effect of protecting life. As we sit here today, are likely women walking into abortion clinics, ready to receive their abortion. Something needs to be done now. We can't allow this thing to languish without action. We ask for the courage of this committee to act on this subject and not to just allow something that purports to do something when it in fact doesn't. Why would we do that?
Thank you, Mr. Hill. Any further questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Sir, go ahead and state your name and we'll hear your testimony.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just maybe 2 minutes. My name is Mike Lehman, representing the Catholic Diocese of Cheyenne. Just speaking to the question of healthcare in this realm. For 13 years, I was a firefighter EMT at Poudre Fire Authority in Fort Collins. And we were trained that whenever we had a female patient of childbearing age, until we could rule it out, we had to account for the possibility that we might have a second patient. Nowhere in the treatment flow chart were we to assess whether the first patient wanted the second patient before we could consider it a second patient. If she was pregnant, we had 2 patients. This standing order wasn't subject to the varying beliefs of first responders. It was prescriptive to every responder because they came from medical control. Being negligent of this standing order put a firefighter's career at risk, could damage the department's reputation, and expose the department and the city to lawsuits. I encourage all of our legislators to have conversations with their medical professionals at home, but I encourage you to ask them questions like these. When do you account for a second patient? And on what grounds? Why, after confirming a positive pregnancy test, do doctors prescribe prenatal vitamins? Who is that for? Madam Chairman, abortion is not healthcare. We know that often the injury that it causes women is obvious. And for the fetus, abortion feels like the opposite of healthcare 100% of the time. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Committee, any questions of Mr. Lehman? Vice Chairman Ottman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Mr. Lehman, are you for or against?
Well,
Mr. Lehman.
Madam Chairman, I'm sorry. Just addressing the question, the legal experts in the room, I would leave that to them as far as the best strategy to get there.
Any additional questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you for joining us this morning. All right, committee, we are going to have to continue this bill. We're reconvening, it's 10 a.m. right now. I apologize that the first bill took so long, a little longer than what we anticipated, but we'll continue this bill. Monday morning, I'm going to ask that we start our meeting Monday morning at 7 a.m. instead of 8. And the meeting is adjourned.